Good afternoon. Welcome to the U.S. Institute of Peace and the event Women Guiding Peace After War, Lessons from Rwanda. My name is Kathleen Keenest, and I'm the Director for Gender Policy and Strategy here at the Institute. And I want to extend an especially warm thank you to the NGO Inclusive Security for their role in co-hosting this event today. So thank you for your team and your leadership. We have a terrific panel organized and a full house here. And so I also want to welcome many of you who are joining us via webcast today. Let me begin by saying that the U.S. Institute of Peace was founded 33 years ago by the U.S. Congress as an independent national institute dedicated to the proposition that peace is possible, practical, and essential for U.S. and global security. Every day at USIP, we make it a practice to analyze and to learn from our experiences of working in conflict zones. And so today's event is very much in keeping to our commitment of learning more about the gender impacts of violence and violent conflict, and how women can and do play a central role in guiding peace. The event today will also help us understand more about Rwanda, a country that just 23 years ago was caught for 100 horrific days in a genocide with over 800 people murdered. What happened after the genocide? And how do we make sense of the fact that this same country was rated in 2016 Global Gender Gap Index as the top 5 countries in gender equality, just after Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden? The United States had a ranking of 45. So these are the many questions that we have to look forward to, hopefully with some ideas and answers this afternoon. I'm now honored to introduce you to 5 distinguished panelists who will aid in our analysis and our understanding. Each of the panelists' bios are with the agenda, but for the sake of our viewing audience and time, I'm going to now offer just a very abbreviated introduction. First, I want to welcome Ambassador Swanee Hunt back to USIP. She is the founder and chair of Inclusive Security and the author of Rwandan Women Rising. Her work on ensuring inclusivity began as when she was ambassador to Austria, when she hosted negotiations and an international symposia focused on stabilizing the neighboring Balkan states. Today, we will hear about her 4th book, which explores how including women leaders enabled Rwanda to rebuild after the 1994 genocide. Joining us also is Kansile Nishimiwa. Kansile is the survivor of the 1994 genocide. She was 14 years old at the time. She is a committed speaker on genocide and a defender of global women's rights, and an advocate for other genocide survivors. Kansile detailed her story in the published book, Test to the Limit, a genocide survivor's story of pain, resilience, and hope. Welcome, Kansile.
Thank you.
Pleased to also introduce to you Ambassador George Moose, who is the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Institute of Peace Board of Directors. He was appointed by the White House in June 2007 to our board. He is a career member of the U.S. Foreign Service, where he attained the rank of Career Ambassador, where he served in the capacity in the Republic of Benin and the Republic of Senegal. He also serves on the boards of Search for Common Ground, the Atlantic Council, and Elder Hostel. And also joining us today from USIP is our Director of Africa Programs, Susan Stigant. Susan has focused much of her work on the design and implementation of constitution-making processes in post-conflict and transitional states. Previously, she managed constitutional development and engagement programs in Somalia, Yemen, and South Sudan with the National Democratic Institute. And finally, our moderator today is Carla Capel. Carla is USIP's Vice President for the Center for Applied Conflict Transformation. This center serves as the hub for the Institute's common resources to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict. She was previously Chief Strategy Officer for USAID and its first Senior Coordinator for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. Prior to joining USAID, Carla directed the Institute for Inclusive Security here in Washington and the Office of Hunt Alternatives Fund. Please join me now in welcoming the panel and its moderator, Carla Capel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I have to start by encouraging some of those who are standing in the back to take these empty seats in the front, not least of all because I know it will drive Ambassador Hunt crazy to have these empty seats. So you will do her a personal favor and all of us by occupying them. So there are 4 of them.
Come on down.
And they are free. And I know that we have an overflow room as well, but we'd love to get these filled, and I know we have a lot of people online. So welcome for what is an important conversation and one that I know has been percolating for a long time in your head. Wow. So maybe we will start the conversation there, and we still have 2 more seats, ladies. Mostly ladies standing in the back of the room. Tell us a little bit about the genesis for this book and the voyage you've traveled in putting it together, because I know you've been thinking about it a long time.
I have. Thank you. As Kathleen mentioned, thank you for that introduction. Oh, wait, before, I would like to honor my good friend Matilda Mukatabana, ambassador from Rwanda to the United States. Would you stand up so people can... She is a spectacular representation, a representative of her country. As Kathleen mentioned, I was in Vienna as ambassador when Bosnia went up in flames, when Yugoslavia. And while that was a long war, it was at the same time that Rwanda was happening. And so out of that came a sense that I had that women were not involved at all in the peace process. I know because I hosted negotiations. And it turned into a very, very disappointing result. And the women that I talked with, I interviewed 26 of them for 7 years. They said if we had been in that negotiation, it would have been different. And then they go into length telling us how. And then Joe Nye was dean of the Kennedy School, and he saw women's leadership as a manifestation of soft power. So he asked me to come from Vienna to there and create the Women in Public Policy program, and I did that because of this strong interest in what became inclusive security. Then I was asked by the U.S. Embassy to come to Rwanda, and I was looking at that, and I thought, Carla, that is the example of what women can do, because, I was following, they're 49% of the parliament. I said, wow. And then I thought, I'm going to write this book with a lot of help from my friends, including you. And then I thought, I didn't get it done, and there's another election. Crap, because there's no way they're going to maintain that 49, and they went up to 56. So now I was really racing the clock.
So you were okay.
But then I thought it's not. Third time is not going to be the charm here. But lo and behold, they came up to 64, and I thought, this is the example. And when those women helped put together their country after that genocide, they created a model for the entire world, and I wanted to document that using the women's voices.
So deconstruct that a little bit. When you say it's the model, what do you think are the key ingredients? What do you think in your research and investigation went into that and that evolutionary process that brought them higher and higher?
Right. What they talk about is the devastation, and the day after they would have 6 children macheted, they had to bury the bodies. Like you can decide you're traumatized, but you still have to bury the bodies. And that was the kind of pragmatism that these women, like, they were being forced out of their pain. So, I mean, they had to have both at the same time. And so they started organizing at a village level. And of course, the great organizer among them was Inyumba, Aloysia Inyumba, who died at 48. And this book is dedicated to her, and she was my friend and our friend. So she organized these village councils that were all women, because it wasn't a progressive society. It's not like, oh, well, you start out with these gang-ho women. No, I mean, if a woman was present with men, she was not to speak. So how do you go from that to being the majority in the parliament? Well, she organized these 15,000 villages, because that's all Rwanda is villages, right? I mean, excuse me. I mean, there are some exceptions, Ambassador. But you get my drift, right? And so she's not nodding her head, and for those of you who can see. Anyway, so there are all these villages, and these women, they have to decide to, essentially, we would say, to run to be representing their village. And then you have to run for the next smaller group. Well, you do that 6 times in tears, and you are really ready. And then you get yourself on the Constitutional Commission, which creates the 30% quota, 30% of the parliament set aside. Women who are pushed up are going to run for those seats, obviously, and the top is pulling them up. That's the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame. Okay. So you have this pull from the top and this push from the bottom, and out of that comes all kinds of change. But Carla, the one thing that is the lesson, I think, there are so many lessons here for the international community, and I do get to those, but I mean, not to you right now. But I'll spare you. But one of the most interesting things is that the chaos cracked open the culture. And when we think about a place like Syria, we think about a place that's just a god-awful disaster, like Bosnia. You've got chaos. You've got in Egypt, after Tahrir Square, you've got chaos. And the question is there a crack in that social stratum that women can go into for political leadership? And I think Rwanda is an example.
It's interesting. So I know that philosophically your perspective is that by bringing women in, you make a difference. Could you speak a little bit to what you've observed as the difference that these Rwandan women leaders have made as they have consolidated ever a greater share of power within the legislative branch?
Yes. And it's not just the legislative. I was talking to one of the U.S. ambassadors about these great numbers in the parliament. He said, you're missing the story. That's the famous one. The real story is in the cabinet. And they're almost, well, at different times, like 30, 40% of the judiciary. But in those cabinet positions, you'd think, oh, well, Minister of Gender. Yeah, true. But also Minister of Agriculture. I mean, that's the big one, Minister of Foreign Affairs, these really important ministries. And when you talk to Paul Kagame, he quips, I'm really having to look and find men for my cabinet. And so in those roles, they led the process on unity and reconciliation. And Inyumba was the first commissioner, and she said, I would lie in bed at night and I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then, and this is key, and then she said, I'm going to ask the people what to do. And she was, going from one village to another on those deep-rutted roads and talking to the people in the village. And so I learned from her about listening, because out of that, different villages had different ways of doing it. Some acted it out, some had songs, some had all kinds of stories about how, you have Tutsi women who adopt 3 Hutu children, or Hutu women who adopt 4 Tutsi orphans. I mean, it's just extraordinary what they did to unite the country. And there's example after example. But the other piece is the justice system. And it's called Gacaca. And they had 800,000 men in prison. And they had to get these men out of these prisons. And so the women were the first to organize these courts. And if you think about it, this was very, very dangerous, because women would go as the witnesses, and they would go as the judges. They weren't all the judges, they weren't all the witnesses. But when they did, they were risking reprisals, because if a man was convicted or just even brought before the court, it was very, very dangerous. And will you let me read a quote? And it won't be very long. Okay. I'm used to Carla yanking my chain.
Okay, I'm saying nothing.
You don't know how. Okay, so this is about the Gacaca, and one of the women who worked with these women who'd been raped and had to, they'd been through hell and back, and she said, if you saw these little district offices, you'd think, oh, well, this is going to take place in private. But it wasn't, because there were all these windows and there was no one guarding, and it was in the middle of the village. And so this is her quote. She says, Gacaca was very grueling and complex. So we have to, give credit to the people who carried out these trials. These people in the village were often not trained in legal matters, and some were not even educated in any field. And by that, I think that's kind of code, but they couldn't read, right? And here they are leading these trials. And then she said the witnesses and survivors were targeted to prevent them from speaking out or in retaliation after they gave the testimony. And they knew that these convicts might lash out because they felt like they had nothing to lose. The women who participated in the Gacaca, this is interesting, in any of these roles were particularly at risk because of their weaker social position. But the women themselves thought, after all I've been through, I don't have anything to lose either. So I'll stop with this quote. This is Marie Claire, who had been gang raped when she was 14 in the village. Everyone in the village saw it. And she says, when you look back at the genocide and what happened to the country, and you survived, not because you're mighty or there's anything unique that made you survive, then you feel indebted and have to lay the ground for your country's future. That's why we had to contribute everything we could.
So it's very interesting. To what do you attribute the Rwandan women's success in gaining this power? Because you've cited a number of different ingredients, but I'm curious, after your investigation, where you land.
They had each other. That was a big, big part. They were doing this en masse. And of course there were the role models, like in Yumba. And of course there was the international community who was saying, come to Beijing, come to Harvard, we'll come there, we'll do some training, et cetera, et cetera. But the women had each other. They had the pull from the top, granted, and that's super important. But the women had each other.
Well, I want to bring in Consolee, but before I turn to her, I know that, Swanee, you're a storyteller. Is there any, and the book is full of stories.
Right.
Is there any story that you think kind of captures and crystallizes of an individual that you would bring forward this journey for Rwandan women?
Sure. So put yourself in a village. You're a widow. You're a widow because your husband's been slaughtered, and in fact, your son has been slaughtered, and your son was slaughtered by his best friend. Now, best friend fled, and then best friend decided to come back, and 2 million people who had fled, mostly guys, came back. And they were in this sort of education camp, to help them with this reentry. And so one of the things to help them is the women in the village went up to the camps. And so they would talk to the men and say, okay, you're not going to face reprisals when you come back, but there's going to be really hard feelings, et cetera, et cetera. So she's up in this education camp, and she sees the boy who slaughtered her boy. And she said to him, look, your family is gone. My son is gone. Now you're my son. And I can hardly tell these stories, and he comes back, and she says, you may live in my home because you're my son. And he said, I can't do that. So he lives in like a shed in the back of the garden. But she said to him, when you marry, I'm giving you the cow. And those of you who spend time in Africa, you understand what that means, that I'm giving you the inheritance. And she said, and when I die, you have the house. Stories like that all over the country.
So there's something about that character, too, and the culture, and how you move that forward and carry it forward. Consolee, for you, this is personal. Tell us a little bit about your story, to the extent that you're comfortable, and your journey in the years since.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you so much for having me here today to be part of it. Thank you, Ambassador, for really telling the story, our story. It really means a lot for all of us, and for the people to hear our story. And I think that the women are really grateful that you're telling their story. And this encourages me more myself to keep speaking as well. And I just want to thank you, Ambassador, for being here. My story is not a very easy story to tell, like many other survivors. So it has been very difficult for me to tell my story, but I realized that we need to tell our story, what happened, because as the time goes by, there are so many genocide deniers out there. So we don't want our stories to be denied. So we just want to make sure that the world learn from what happened to us, and also to keep the memories alive for those we've lost. And it's very necessary to hear what happened. And for me, it really took me a long time, but I'm so grateful for the people being around me. When the genocide happened, I was very young. I was 14 years old. As you can imagine, a 14-year-old, is someone who is happy and looking forward to a good life like any other. I was just normal like any other teenager. So I was very fortunate to be born in a family that loved me, that cared for me. I had siblings. I was the oldest, and I had my sister and my 3 brothers. And my parents were teachers, and a big family. We were so happy. But I never thought that my life, the joy we had in our home, suddenly would change. And I never imagined that there would be a genocide that happened in our country. And of course, growing up myself, my parents never talked very much about what they went through before, because the killings happened even before 1994. Of course, in 1994, it was a big scale. where they wanted to exterminate the minority Tutsis. So my parents, of course, they went through discrimination when they were young at work. So I learned that later on. So, but they managed to make sure me and my siblings felt confident, loved, and cared for, because that's a culture we live in. That's our culture. Family means a lot for you. So everybody cares for one another in your family. So. And when the genocide happened, my family, we found ourselves going into hiding. So, but for me, I thought this was going to end. So, but as a young person, hearing everywhere that the people were our neighbors, picking up their machetes, going everywhere to kill the people who've never done anything, just simply because we're Tutsis, I couldn't comprehend in my mind, like, how these people changed. So suddenly accepting the ideology of hating other people, being kind to them, who've been their neighbors. These are people who came to our homes. We shared meals, but suddenly they accept hating the other people simply because of who they are. So it was so hard for me to comprehend. So for some people who deny what happened, like using other ways to explain what happened, but throughout the country, everybody picked up the machetes. Majority of Hutus picked up their machetes. So it was just not sudden. It was a well-prepared genocide. So, and in my village, we had to go in hiding. So I grew up in a western province, which used to be called Kibuye. So we found ourselves going in hiding in the bushes, in sorghum plantations. And I remember my parents and myself and one of my paternal aunt came with us together. And we had to find people who were good friends of ours to hide it. So it was not very easy, because throughout the 3 months, people have done horrible things to us. Either they called killers for us, or they have done horrible things to us. So, and unfortunately, in the first, April 15th, I remember when the killers found us, that's when we were hiding, hiding in the house when people took us in their ceilings. I will never forget that day, as a young girl who was very close to my dad. The killers followed him and came outside while we were hiding up in the ceiling and saying how they have murdered my dad along with so many other people, Tutsis. So to me, that was the beginning of thinking this is going to be worse. We never thought we were going to survive. So, but we kept hiding. My mother kept taking me and my siblings to people to think who is kind. And so we had to search who still have a kind heart to keep us at least, longer in the safe home. So, but unfortunately, there were so many incidents where people did horrible things. I remember, because it was a rainy season for the people who knew during that period, so we had to go through the bushes. My mother had to carry my younger brother, who was 16 months old. The rest of us kids, we followed her, and where she would knock the door of a neighbor. So I remember one place we went, because my mother, being a teacher in the community, was very known by people. So as we got there, because the kids were in the house, the mother was part of the killing. Some of the people, that some women who were part of the killing during the genocide. So her husband was at the roadblock. So as we got there, the kids begged their mother to help us, because the mother was completely changed. And as we got in her home, in the house, she said, "I've never liked a Tutsi in my life, but it's because of my kids." So to me, I think it was a miracle. And I remember another place, because my mother had to keep taking us to several places. These were to show you how people have changed, the people who were considered to be very close friends of ours. So I remember one home we went, and these people, their kids were the same age as me. I used to go to their home, and we were hungry. My mother was trying to figure out who can help. So as we went there, I remember we knocked the door because we had to avoid going to the main road. As you can imagine, everywhere there were roadblocks, so we had to avoid going to the main road. So we had to go through the bushes and sorghum plantation. And as we got there in the home, it was early in the morning. For the people who know our town in Rwanda, there is a high school there. So, and that high school was a place where there were so many killers who gathered there to make sure they found the Tutsis to kill. So, and this home they lived facing the high school. So, as we knocked the door, so he came outside and he was wearing a towel around his waist, and there was a man who was standing there who was helping him to kill people. And he started calling people using a small drum. So, and he was facing the high school, hoping that there would be many other killers to come and help him. So, and the rest of us, the kids, we begged, and my mother begged, and so he refused, and he went back in the house, but we didn't know what else he was going to do. So as we were standing there, this man who actually was supposed to even kill us right away, I would say it was a miracle. He told us, just leave here. So this is one place. I remember because another place, my mother, of course, she completely realized that people have changed. We didn't know who else to turn to. So she carried my younger brother on her back the whole time. And because we're hungry, a lot of times going through the bushes and falling down, sometimes she would come and pick us, all of us, because it was not easy for her. And as you can imagine, as a parent, she hear the tears sometimes. Sometimes I would catch her crying. So I remember because there was a time the killers found us and they took my mother, and the rest of us kids stayed in that place where we're hiding in this home. And throughout the village, so many men were killed. And women who were not killed, they were kept for being brutally raped by gangs, killers, or some of them were killed immediately. So that's why you could find so many women who are still alive. So, and they took my mother and my younger brother, and in our village, because mostly men were killed, so they heard my brothers were still alive. So they started talking how they didn't do anything. So meaning at that time they used to use word to work. Normally work, you think it's making money to make you live a good life, but they use the terms the terms that are normal, we use in our normal lives to kind of changing in the killing times. So even in gospel songs, even they use some of the gospel songs to make sure, saying that the Tutsis God has given up on us and we have to be killed. So I remember my mother saw, in my mind I was thinking, I don't know if these killers who took her, whether she was going to survive. So fortunately, we were able to find her, but they left her to a neighbor where they decided whenever they wanted, they were going to kill her. So I was able to find her and my siblings, because this man was hiding as refused to keep us any longer. As we got there, myself, I just want to make sure we are together, whatever happens, because there was not any way to think that we're going to survive. At least if we were all together, at least we will be killed together. So they decided to kill my brothers. And when the time came to show you how this genocide was so bad, one of the people who came to kill my brothers along with other killers was somebody who grew up with my mom. My mom considered to be like a brother. So he came with a machete, has killed a club, he murdered so many people, and he had other killers with him. They took my younger brothers, who were 9 years old, 7, 16 months old, to our destroyed home. because it was completely destroyed, and they slaughtered them and threw their bodies in our septic tank. And the rest of us girls, they didn't want to kill us. They said, we are going to kill whenever we want. So as you can imagine, my mother, it was very hard for her to have this boy, especially the one who was holding on to her all the time, being taken from her. We didn't want to hide anymore. But when you survive, things keep happening. So as I mentioned before, like so many girls and women everywhere were raped and brutally raped, Tutsis women, in a very torturing way. We didn't know whether we were going to just be killed right away. We thought we were going to be tortured the same way before we'd be killed. So where we're hiding, and this man who was our neighbor, these are the people we knew, came where we were hiding. He had a sword, and unfortunately, because in that home we were hiding, the man was not, was part of the killing, except the wife, who was kind enough to help me and my mother and my sister, but she couldn't help much. So, and this man decided to take me from everyone and dragged me on the street and beat me with a sword. Unfortunately, he took me not too far from our home, and I was raped by him. As you can imagine, I want to be killed right away. So this man left me there hoping that there will be many others who come and torture me more. But I was able to drag myself to where my mom was, and she saw how I looked. Imagine the pain my mother had in her heart, having to lose her boys, and then to see how I looked like. And luckily, in the Muslim community that was not far from our home, a man who was actually never been part of the killing was able to hide us until the country was liberated by the RPF, and we survived and found out that there's so many of our family members, my grandparents, our homes, everything we had, myself being raped and having the pain in my heart. I didn't know whether I was going to be a normal functioning 14-year-old as a happy girl I was before. It was not easy for my mom and my sister. It's a long story. There were so many other places we've been. So, but my mother is a very strong woman. I don't know, I can't find words to describe. She's one of the people that I admire. I'm so grateful she survived with me. I'm grateful that because I have friends who don't have anyone. At least whenever I needed to cry, even if she had the pain in her heart, I can lean on her shoulder. This is a woman who decided to go back to work. And despite all the things that people have done to her, she went in school and taught some of the kids of the people who have done horrible things to us. This is a woman who taught me to not hate anybody despite all the things they have done to us. She taught me that we should be different. And the people worked with her. She became like a teacher to them, and said, showing them what you've done. Like, this is a person who woke up in the morning and told me and my sister and my cousin, actually, who was living with us, that we should grow up being kind to other people, no matter what they do to us. We should, because it's not going to help us heal from what we went through. And we should help others. It doesn't matter where they come from, who they are, whether they are the kids from the people who have done horrible things to us. We should be kind to them. And as tough as he was, but I'm so grateful that I had to learn that. So it helped me to be able to learn to be compassionate to others, because this is what we needed in our country. So, and our neighbors, they learned from her, like many other widows, they were able. So for her, now the kids she taught are so grateful that she's been there. I get messages from people tell me, thank you for your mom for being a good teacher for us. And nobody came to her home and refused to give her meals. So even now she does that. So, and for me, these are my sheroes. Actually, I would say my sheroes. I'm sorry to say sheroes. There are women like her. They are a pillar of our strength. So to me, if we didn't have those women like her to teach us how, to keep loving, to never hate, I don't think we would have been where we are now. So, and for me, looking around and see that I learned how to gradually to learn how to speak out what happened to me. Despite the pain I was carrying, I had to be vulnerable. I learned that vulnerability is not a weakness. So to me, when I started talking about my experience, it was almost like a relief, in my heart. It was a relief in my heart. It was like a load lifted off my shoulder. So for me, I realized it was helping my mother as well. So we helped each other indirectly without knowing that. So, and for me, I looked around myself that we need to start. I need to start from within. Despite the pain I was carrying, I have to make sure that I start from within to make sure that on the outside is better. So, and I think my mother had to do what she had to do, but I also had to help her from healing from deep within. So, and the healing within takes a long time. It's a journey. It's a long journey. So, but we have to start somewhere in order to also make sure we heal from the inside as well. So, for me, speaking out what happened to us, I know there are so many, especially when it comes to sexual violence, not so many women. It's not an easy topic for anybody to talk about. So for me, I had to have the courage to speak to encourage other young girls who were not going to be able to speak out, even those who are no longer alive going to speak out, so that we show people that this is not, sexual violence is not something you heal. It doesn't go anywhere. So for me, it's something you live with, but you have to find a way to heal in some ways. For me, having the consequences of what happened to me, like now I live with HIV as a result of rape. It's not very easy for me. I have something that reminds me every day that what happened to me, but I don't have to. That's why I love Maya Angelou. She said, you may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can refuse to be reduced by them. So I love that because it keeps reminding me that I should not allow what happened to me to dictate how I live with my life. So because there are so many other young people who are coming, so they needed to learn from us how we live, because we need to be a light for them. So, and also to make sure what happened to us, it won't keep happening anywhere, especially when it comes to rape. It's really a horrible thing. I don't want anybody to go through that, because it keeps a mark in your life. It's not, it's really, you can't find the words to describe the pain you carry within yourself. So, and that's why I think for me, I'm encouraged to speak more, because we want to make sure that no one in the world, everybody deserves to live in peace, and we all need to to care for one another, especially for women, because a woman is the heart of the family. That's in our culture. A woman is the heart of the family. So when a woman is taken care of, a woman is healthy and well, they can do much more than you could ever imagine. So Ali, I am strong and healthy because of my mother and many other women. So that's why I'm more encouraged to tell our stories of what happened during the genocide, and also for others to keep doing what they do to help rebuild our lives and our future. So.
Well, first of all, thank you for your willingness to share your story. It's incredibly important to the memory of those who lost their lives and were injured, that you maintain that narrative, that you bring it forward, that you are willing to share that. And perhaps emblematic of the strength of Rwanda's women and your own strength, your mother's strength in carrying that forward. So thank you very much for that. And I think bringing to life in some ways all of the women that you feature and refer to in Rwandan Women Rising. I want to bring in Ambassador Moose, and you have a tough act to follow, I think. And Susan Stigant. Ambassador, maybe you could help us put it in a broader context based on your illustrious work and career in Africa.
Well, thanks, Carla, and thanks, Consulet, for sharing your willingness and openness in sharing your story. It's vitally important to helping us understand. We, in this institute, we do a lot of thinking, but that thinking has to be informed by the reality of what people experience and felt in situations like yours in Rwanda. So vitally important. And thanks to Swani as well for bringing to us a whole collection and a book that's soon to be published. Some of us have had a little bit of a preview of a whole collection of stories, and for providing women survivors of genocide in Rwanda with the vehicle for speaking to us directly about their experiences as well. I think for those, many of us who lived the Rwandan experience, not nearly as personally as you did, but certainly in a very intimate way. I, at the time, as some of you know, I was the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs in that period in 1994 during the genocide. And in fact, is this working?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, the night before the genocide began, I was in Kampala with our colleague Johnny Carson, who's not here today, meeting with Paul Kagame in an effort to try to find a way to complete that negotiation that was going on to prevent what we all feared might be violence, although, frankly, none of us imagined, as you did not, violence on the scale that was to happen. So, simply to say that this is not abstract at all to me, and it's something that has remained very much a part of my consciousness ever since. But it's an experience that I think left me with more questions than answers. And Consul, you've sort of evoked a lot of those questions. You know, how could people who had been your close neighbor, most intimate friends, from one day to the next become something totally different? You know, it raises questions about the very essence of human nature and whether or not this capacity for such extraordinary violence is something that is inherent in our very natures. And I think this, for that reason alone, this book is, your book, Swani, and your testimonials will be enormously helpful in helping us understand that question and so many, many more. But first and foremost, I think what we all take away from this is just, there are two positive stories. The first is a story of extraordinary resilience, which you embody, and the ability of people to go through the most horrific, wrenching experiences and yet emerge with heart, soul, personality, agency to carry forward. And that's extraordinary, and we need to look at that in the context of the many other situations we are looking at right now. And the second part, positive part of that story, is the rise out of this catastrophe, of this extraordinary generation of Rwandan women, and the role that they have asserted for themselves in Rwanda. And that, almost unrivaled in the world, right? And that, too, I think we need to understand better. But it does still leave us with some other questions. And one of the questions I have is to what extent this rise of this movement of empowered women in Rwanda offer the hope and the possibility of a reconciliation, a genuine reconciliation that is lasting and enduring. And more particularly, in the context of Rwanda's current politics, and it will come as no surprise, Madam Ambassadors, that some of us have been somewhat concerned and critical of what we see as a tendency on the part of the government to resort to autocratic means, undemocratic means in its approach to Rwanda's governance, and the implications of that for reconciliation. So the second part of the question is, to what extent is this movement, can it succeed in altering that dynamic? Can it succeed in this great mission of bringing reconciliation to Rwanda? Or is the movement itself threatened by the context within which it emerges? So many, many questions. Those are just a couple that have come to my mind, and I'm sure Susan has some others as well. And I hate to put those questions on you, but I'd be most interested in what your perspective is, how you see what's happening in terms of the role of women, their assertion of their own political power, how that affects the prospects for this wider, larger national reconciliation process that will form the basis of an enduring peace in Rwanda. So, thank you.
Thank you. I think before we turn back, if folks have comments, I'll turn to Susan. Susan works on a number of countries across the continent, and when we were preparing for this discussion, we wanted to make sure we were telescoping out to kind of get the perspective that Consolee even talked about. How do I use the power of this message, both the power of the message of a surviving genocide and the power of women's empowerment to help prevent this from ever taking place again? And so I'm curious, Susan, as to your observations of what the lessons are of and from Rwanda for other parts of the continent.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you to all of the participants today for sharing their stories and their insights. Maybe I can channel some perspectives from some of our partners from South Sudan. And this is a group of men and women who we have been working with, trying to understand how gender, their role as men and women, impacts on the violent conflict in the country. And as part of that program, we were actually able to take them to Rwanda to visit with, learn from, engage with some of the survivors and the organizations that are working in various ways to bring the country back together again. And I think it was striking to me that people would talk about this very important embodiment that you don't have to be associated with the actions of your community. So it's possible that people can be accepted no matter what happened, and that people can be judged on their own actions and not the actions of their family members or of their broader community. And so this was even in a very early stage of the South Sudan conflict, where we know, the numbers are incredibly astonishing now in terms of the number of people who have been displaced, 6 million people who are in desperate need of food assistance, an unknown number of people who've been killed in the conflict. And even at that very early stage, hearing those stories gave people hope that it was possible to move beyond violent conflict. There are various different tools and approaches that can work, and that even people who have family members or others who have been involved in the conflict, that there is a way for them to play a positive role in building peace in their families, in their communities, and at a national level. And I think that's a really, really important story to share. We often get caught up in numbers and in indexes and in frameworks, and what does 6 million people mean? But to hear those stories, both of what people have survived through and how they've moved forward together, I think is very, very powerful. One of the stories that I wish we could tell more about and learn more from is, how do you create that moment where people are united from the chaos and not further divided? Because I think what we've seen over and over again, sadly, is that women and other groups actually get divided through the conflict and aren't able to break through the power dynamics that are taking place. And I believe it's possible, but it would be wonderful to learn what helps to create that moment, so that women can play that very important role in turning the corner and helping to move beyond the current status quo.
Great. Thank you for those thoughts. What I'm going to do, just so you sort of know where we're going, is I'm going to turn back to Ambassador Hunt and Consolee for their comments on the issues that Pastor Moose and Susan have raised, which are fairly wide-ranging. Then I'm going to open up the conversation to all of you so that we can have more of a discussion. Ambassador Hunt, you've been listening now for a while. Thoughts on a whole range of different issues.
Right.
Take your pick.
Okay. I'm going to go back to something you asked, and then I'll connect it to what you're saying. When you said, what is the difference that women have made, and I talked about the unity and reconciliation, but they have also, enacted health care laws and practices that are unparalleled. So, and the same with education. 96% of the children are in school, and it's now compulsory through 9th grade. And so in terms of, the indices, the World Bank et al., they are leapfrogging above other countries. A lot of that is women run. Now, to your point, in terms of the politics, I don't like going there because it's such a well-worn topic. And this is the untold story. Right? And so I think we need to I have to stay with this untold story. But I will say one, I'm breaking my rule. But it's because you and I go back, right? And that is, I was talking, I think it's Stephen Kinzer who wrote a wonderful book, Land of a Thousand Hills, was that the one? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
And he said something about, Kagame is such a strong man that there's no one in the parliament unless he wants that person to be in the parliament. And I said, well, isn't it interesting if he wants all of those women to be in the parliament? Let's just, assume that.
Accept the premise. No?
And so, yeah. And then I think it was somebody said, yeah, well, he just wants them there because, they're moderate, and, they're not going to oppose him, and they're not going to, be starting a war and killing people. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a good,
That's a good reason,
why not?
good reason to have them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, maybe this isn't such a bad idea. So, you get into these really, you start pulling these strings, and sometimes they don't take you where you think they're going to go. And
Fair enough.
it's very hard. It's very hard because in our country, we are so wedded to free speech, and we're so wedded to these basic tenets of democracy. I get that. It's very, very hard after a genocide to go in and say, this is the model. And so if I say that, then it sounds like I'm soft on Kagame, which actually, I'm actually not. But I don't want to also be naive about imposing our kind of democracy in that kind of setting.
Fair enough.
I just broke like 10 rules. But, yeah.
Consolee, whole range of issues, and we've put a lot of pressure on you because you pivot from an incredibly emotional and personal story to a geopolitical analysis, which is very unfair, but we'll do it nonetheless. Thoughts that come to your mind sort of when you move beyond that personal experience and think about the women of Rwanda more generally in the continent of Africa and what it says for the future?
I am so grateful that women our women have done well. So they are really like Ambassador, who is here, an amazing person. And I'm grateful that people are learning from them. So because to me, as a person who grew up there right after the genocide and observing everything, so to me, I think there are so many great lessons to learn from, from all these women, all they have done. So, and I think to me, it was a positive thing for any country can learn from. So it's a positive thing. So because after coming from a tragedy like a genocide, what else? I mean, I've never heard any other country that had a genocide that probably is being able to be where Rwanda is right now. So, and I think to me, I'm grateful that I'm alive to be, even my mother, we are alive. We are so grateful to be able to see this and to see that there is a brighter future for the younger generation because they are going to live a better life, not the life we lived. So I don't know if I can say much beyond that, but but not political, nothing. But to me, I'm so grateful that I'm here to be able to see this happening. So,
well, I think you're doing more than that.
yes,
You're representing your women in your country. And I'll sort of break the fourth wall for a second because one of the things I've seen is the Rwandan women and the importance and potency of their message for other women leaders. I mean, we've, and Swanee and I have seen how Loisa Nyumba went to Liberia and worked with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and the women who were elected after her election into the legislative branch, and how they have hosted the Sudanese and South Sudanese women and really brought their message. And so there is a leadership and a magnification of their impact that extends well beyond just the indicators within Rwanda of progress and the leadership that they've brought to Rwanda. So I think you do see that multiplication and after effects. Let me open it up. And what I'm going to do is I'll take some groups of questions at a time from the floor. And what we'll do is, if you have further thoughts, Pastor Moose and Susan, with regard to that exchange, let's mix that into the conversation so that we make sure to engage everyone. And if when you wait for the microphone and tell us who you are, and we'll take a group of questions and then circle back. We'll start there.
Thank you. My name is Simon Ateba from simonateba.com, an online newspaper based in Nigeria. When these conflicts start, often they start in the media. You hear a Tutsi has just killed, and the other tribe, and so you have these, the fear, the anger, and grows, and eventually is a conflagration, and they can't control it. How do you think that the media can be supported? And because a lot of those medias are actually extremely poor and depends on the government, can easily be manipulated. And so how do you think that the media can be supported to be fair, to be independent, and even, try to detach itself from the tribe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go up here. Sorry, I'll go back.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Liara Falk. I work for the State Department on African energy issues. I'm concerned that a lot of the examples we use about the rise of women in Africa are examples that come particularly from tragedy or from immense conflict like Rwanda and Liberia. What do you think we can do to take the messages of a place like Rwanda and expand it to places that don't have conflict right now but would benefit immensely from the perspectives of women in governance or in economic development?
Why don't we go, let's get some back. Sorry, Chelsea, I'm making you walk.
Not at all.
I apologize.
Where am I going?
Go way back.
I think she recognized me. That's why she said, come back here. My name is Eve Ferguson. I'm from the Library of Congress. And I wanted to ask Constable, well, a lot of times, and it may be difficult for me to ask this the correct way, but a lot of times when something has happened and you have a platform to speak on, you speak on that platform. How has it been integrating into quote-unquote normal Rwandan society without always having to relive or, go back over the tragedy that happened in your life? How has that adjustment been? And do you serve women's groups and help them with somewhat similar situations?
Great, and just for equity's sake, I'm going to take a fourth one. I think this is from the overflow room. Then we're going to come back to the group, and then we'll go out for some more questions. So this is from the former mission director of USAID in Sarajevo, Howard Sumka, for Swanee Hunt. Although killing ended in former Yugoslavia, reconciliation remains elusive. Kosovo, Macedonia, Bosnia. Why did the chaos that rippled open that culture not lead to serious reconciliation or to more political and social engagement by women? So we have a wonderful and wide-ranging series of questions. And I would ask everybody to be succinct in the questions they answer. You don't all need to answer every question, because we have a ton of questions to scoop up again next. So who would like to go first with whichever question they're interested in responding to?
Well, let me just very briefly to start, because I just wanted to circle back to the question. The question of how this extraordinary presence now of women in the political space is influencing the process of national reconciliation. Because I think, and that then loops back to the question of what, how does this then speak to other places, that hopefully or happily don't have conflict? What are the lessons that one can take from the experience of Rwanda recovering from this terrible genocide, and apply that to places that have not, and hopefully will not experience that? And I do think there's a lesson there, because I do think that the issue is that the kinds of roles and voices and influence that women have are precisely now in Rwanda, are precisely laying the foundation, we hope, for a never again in Rwanda. And the lesson that others should draw from that is, you need to be doing this now. So, because that is what inoculates you. That's what helps inoculate. It's not the only thing. And I think we need to be clear about this. This is not the solution to every problem that one confronts in Africa, but it's certainly part of the solution. And because we know from our experience that all too often these conflicts arise precisely because of exclusion of various kinds, and gender exclusion being one of the most important.
Susan, do you want to speak to the media on the first question a little bit?
Sure. I think the question was about how can you ensure media independence when media stations are really dependent on government funding. And I think this is part of a broader effort to build institutions across to ensure that it's not just government that's funding media, but that there's also other mechanisms and openings for it. And hopefully over time, it also means that there's a robust space for civil society to have some sort of oversight and some sort of say in what is in the media. And I think it's concerning. I think we see as a trend that media oversight bodies that are being created generally on the continent are not to help to ensure that there isn't hate speech, but they're being actually used to limit speech or limit access of journalists. So I think this is a really important area to focus. There are probably stories of women journalists who've played a really important role going forward. I think just to pivot to the question about the successes, I think we often focus on the political and the politics, and that's absolutely critical. But I think there are really important leadership stories that are about other sectors, and figuring out ways to elevate those is a complement to what's happening in the political sphere.
Great, thank you.
I'll do Yugoslavia and then go to your question because you're my student. It's good to see you. First of all, in Yugoslavia, when I lay a lot of this at the feet of Dayton, and that, as you know, was not Yugoslavs. I mean, that we were very, very involved in Dayton. There were 40 women's groups determined to stop the war, and they were multicultural. And that group, they even were organized into a group of women's groups. They were not included in the Dayton Agreement, so it was basically all men.
This is the other book. It's not their war.
That's right. This was not our war. And there's another one called Worlds Apart. Okay. But Christmas is coming, so don't worry. You have excuses to buy them all. Okay. So if you look at what the women said, and that's where I'm gathering this, it's not my own analysis, they said, okay, Dayton guaranteed a right to return to your home. Yeah, the problem was that it didn't guarantee that indicted war criminals would be picked up. So you've got a mayor there who led in what this stupid word, ethnic cleansing. There's nothing clean about ethnic cleansing, right? But the rape and pillaging. And so he's still there. So right to return, really? I mean, how is that meaningful? The other thing, it established 3 presidents because they couldn't decide. So, these guys, they bluffed their way through. They had 3 presidents, a Serb, a Croat, and what they called a Muslim, but a Bosniak, right? Right. And 3 foreign ministers and 3 prime ministers. Well, clearly you can't govern like that. And so you had to be a hardliner to actually have one of those places because you had to declare yourself a Croat, a Bosnian Croat, right? Even though you were from a mixed marriage. So now you had to declare yourself. And the women say this was the opposite of what they had been working on. And so I'm going to link these 2 answers because Yugoslavia, when it fell apart, had 2 things. It had the smallest percent of women in the parliament of any country in Europe. And it also had the highest percentage of women PhDs of any country in Europe. So put those together, right? And now I'm taking us to the U.S., right? Are there any lessons here? Well, guess what? We are 100th in the world in terms of representation in Parliament. 100th. And we've got 33% of the Democratic caucus is women. 8% of the Republican caucus is women. And the women in both parties, they run at the same rate, but the Republican women cannot get out of their primaries. So if, in fact, we had 33% women on both sides, we would break gridlock. I'm just telling you we would. We would break gridlock and have a range of different policies that are much more humane. And we have brand new research, by the way, like last week, that says even with that imbalance, women are co-sponsoring many more bills. And they're doing it across aisles, and they're putting themselves at risk in terms of their place in the party. So we have to figure out what they can learn about representation in Parliament.
One other example I would cite is the research on India, where there were set-asides at the panchayat level, and women in government changed both the governance and the prioritization vis-a-vis investments. And so you're dealing with a non-conflict setting in which you increase women's leadership and you see increased investments in social and infrastructure. It changes in the way that budgets are spent, with positive knock-on benefits for the well-being of those populations. Consulet, your personal journey home.
Yeah. I think it's been very positive for my fellow Rwandans and survivors who actually it has helped them. They encourage me to keep talking. So because it's helping most of them, a lot of them actually, because we need to encourage each other to tell our stories, and we want our stories to be heard. So especially for what we went through. So and I think a lot of them are starting to tell their own stories, which is going to help them even start a journey of healing within. So and I think it's so important to know what women went through. I don't know if most of you have heard. There was a documentary. Some of the women are called the Uncondemned. So there are some women who got the courage to go testify in the in the court, in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And for the first time in the history, rape was convicted as a crime against humanity. So the courage of these women also to speak, and it helps other women too. So I mean, and for me, I found that the courage to, because for me too, I was able to face the men, but it was not easy. I was still a teenager, but we had to keep sharing the struggle. You go through, but what we did, and I think it's so important. So, and I think they've been very encouraging. We keep helping each other and being part of our healing journey as well. So I'm part of so many survivors groups, and we talk about it. I'm so grateful that I'm able to have the strength in others to help, to contribute, to help my fellow survivors and to help each other. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. More questions, comments?
Whoa.
All right, let's go do a little bit of this side. Back here.
Hi, my name is Sandra Tomben. I'm a graduate student at George Mason University at the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. It's such a long title. But my question is, thank you all for being here. Consolates, it was very heartbreaking to hear your story, and I thank you for the courage to be here and to speak today. I'm from South Sudan, so I can relate to what you've talked about what's happening back home. My question is, looking at this room and looking at the majority of us being female and being women, my question for all of you is, how do we include men in that conversation? Because ultimately, they will be part of the future, right? So how do we change their perspective to prevent crimes like rape in the future? How do you see men being part of this conversation, and how do we move forward from here? So,
thank you. Come to the ambassador. You want to speak?
since most people are afraid of political discourse,
Not me.
and since you actually mentioned me while I was here, so I have to make a small point about the political stuff very quickly, and then maybe you can weigh on what I'm saying. One of the things is, I wish that the research that Swanee did in an amazing fashion would be undertaken also to see the political development in Rwanda since the genocide.
Right.
Because one thing that sometimes, and I'm saying it, because I represent Rwanda obviously, and you might think it's because of political reasons. Myself, not too long ago, I was living in the United States, and I was teaching history of the United States. So pretty much, I went through the history. There was no time when democracy is a place you learn. It's a process.
Yeah.
For all practical purposes, Rwanda is 23 years old. All our institutions had failed miserably, completely. We are talking about the church. Yep. We are talking about the state. We had the media. We had the media. What we call media of genocide that is being tried in the international tribunal. So when you look at the women development, you can't really understand it without putting it in a larger context of Rwandan history. Because there is a big pillar of political empowerment and good governance. Because you were talking about, for instance, the whole idea of always talking about women empowerment in conflict stuff. For us, we can't separate that from genocide, unfortunately. But what I'm trying to tell you is that we didn't sit on our butts waiting for the political development to happen. What you don't see in Rwanda that you see and I really would invite you to go and see, especially the youth, because as you know, Rwanda is 70% below 30. These are people who are empowered. If we go to our ministries, all these women we are talking about, they are young people, like Console, who don't want to carry the same burden. And these people have agency. It's not, that you would give too much power to President Kagame if you say that he comes to the United States, where we are going to have 10 voting stations of kids who were born in the United States, who are Americans, but who can exercise also their voting rights in Rwanda. Now, you can say, why is he so popular? You have to understand again within the context of Rwanda. He's the first person who did the nation. We had the country. We were divided. For the first time, we are saying, it's not perfect. We are still really, like what Console was saying, it's a generational thing. It will never happen tomorrow. But when you are looking at a country coming out of genocide 23 years ago, achieving this, it's because of the purpose of the people. It's because they came together. We couldn't have done what we have done without looking at the efficacy of people coming together, the decentralization, the people, the women. Otherwise, we will be removing the agency of women we are talking about. If you say that there's one man who is out there, who is electing himself in office, who is doing all of this, we are at a point when we need stability. Our region is not very stable. So when you find someone who has ensured that not any single person is coming to be cut with a machete, we all lost people. I lost 70 people of the member of my family. I could have said in the United States. But the main reason I'm doing it with passion is because I've seen in the United States, especially, they accept all the economic advancement Rwanda has made. They accept even women. But they believe it's floating somewhere. It's because there's that empowerment of the people. Otherwise, you can't really make it anything that will stand. So I didn't want to do this. It's because you said a personal idea. So
I was hoping you would, indeed. That's why I addressed you.
Great. Thank you very much, our patient gentleman. Thank you, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you. My name is Aman Charani. I'm a student at UGA. You kind of touched on it in the back, actually. I think we all can agree that Rwanda is a great example, and that women in politics has some very important success stories. So I'm curious, because we mentioned that the United States was 42nd or 45th or something. As a young man in this country, what can I do, or what can I kind of discuss amongst my friends to help empower women and to help bring that change in this country and around the world. Because, you know, we've always been told that speaking is one thing, but it's important to pass the mic along. And I want to know, as a young man growing up in this country, what can I do to help women and to bring our country up, I guess, on that list and other places in the world?
I have one. Oh, we're waiting, right?
No, okay, we have 3 minutes left, so I'm not going to be able to take any more questions, but you can go ahead. And I'm going to, but wait, I'm going to give the last word to Consolee, because she is our guest of honor, if you don't mind my saying so.
No, please.
So go ahead, you have one.
I have one, and that is, they're going to be, according to NewsHour, lots and lots of open seats. And you know, 92% of incumbents are in the parliament are reelected in our Congress. I think it's something like that. And so we're going to have these open seats in next year. What we need to do, what both Republican sides and Democratic side, we need to make sure that those women are contesting very, very strongly. Well, first you have to find women. You have to encourage women. They may be business women. They may be heading a nonprofit. They could be a university president, whoever they are. You need to get your friends to call them over and over and over. And don't just rely on the D-trip or whatever, you know, the equivalent is. Yeah, is there an R? Trip? Anyway, whatever. Don't rely on the political parties. Find an organization, and there are plenty of them, and they get bipartisan, that are working on getting women into our Congress, and get behind those.
Mr. Ambassador.
I think I rest my case.
Susan?
Yield to Consolee.
Yield the floor.
Oh, thank you. I just want to really thank you so much for organizing this. Really, it means a lot. It meant a lot for me to be here. Thank you for your words. And one message I can give you is that no matter what you go through, never lose hope. Because that's what happened to us. We didn't give up. We never lost hope. And when you have faith, you have strength. And one message I can leave you with is, no matter what horrible circumstances you may face in your life, never lose hope. For losing hope is the beginning of your own self-defeat. I can leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for what I think was an incredibly rich conversation. And thanks to those who are online and in the overflow room. And this will be posted online as well, so you can share it with others. I think it's been very rich. Thank you for joining us.